Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because, we're going to be talking about must-have customer experience conversations that need to be taking place within your organization. Look, we get too easily distracted, which, matter of fact, is actually one of the topics in the particular book we're going to be talking about, and I'll introduce that to you in a second. But first, I want to introduce to you the author and the guest on our show today, David Avrin. He was born in Los Angeles, and his family moved to Denver, Colorado, when he was very young. The second oldest of 6 kids and the son of an actual rocket scientist. True. David learned early the importance of being bold and finding his place, lest he be lost in the mix. Like the small chicks in the nest, all clamoring for food and attention, those who were timid rarely got the work or the last piece of pizza. Growing up, each of his siblings found a different niche, from sports to writing and more. In high school, David gravitated toward theater and music, ultimately securing a full scholarship to studying acting in college. However, a few years in, David came to the realization that he was not likely to be able to support a wife and kids doing community theater somewhere in God's Wrath, Iowa. So he ultimately changed his major to journalism and studied marketing and advertising. After college, he quickly found himself often on the TV news, not as a reporter, but as a community affairs spokesman for the Denver Health Department and later PR director for Denver's Children's Hospital. In 1995, David Avrin opened his own PR and marketing agency and worked with some big national brands like Boston Market and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. He also was increasingly asked to present for conferences and local meetings and discovered that you can actually get paid to speak. For a true extrovert, this was a revelation. For nearly 25 years, David has been speaking to and consulting with organizations in 25 countries on 6 continents, initially speaking on marketing and brand strategy, and more recently, leveraging a superior customer experience to create meaningful differentiation. As new empty nesters, David and his wife, Laurel, are focused on helping their 5 grown kids, ages 19 through 28, make it in the world and working to leave the campsite a little better than they found it. The legacy he wants to leave behind is one of kindness, encouragement, and mentoring. David believes that for those of us who have enjoyed a large measure of success, it's essential that we send the elevator back down. When he's not traveling extensively, helping companies become ridiculously easy to do business with, David and his wife, Laurel, live happily in the Denver suburb of Highlands Ranch, Colorado. David Avrin, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I am more than ready, Jim. Let's do it.
And I appreciate that.
I was going to say a very generous introduction there. The fact that I wrote it, is meaningless, but it was very generous nonetheless.
But here's what it does: it allows people to connect with you as an individual, and so therefore, the things that you're going to share absolutely become more meaningful. And it's all about us making a difference, like you were saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sending the elevator back down. So this particular book was actually created out of a lot of conversations that you had in regards to the customer experience. So tell us a little bit about the sourcing of this.
Absolutely. And for those who are not watching the video version, my most recent book is called The Morning Huddle. And the subtitle is Powerful Customer Experience Conversations to Wake You Up, Shake You Up, and Win More Business. And it really came out of a couple of things. Recognizing that as I was working with clients, audiences, and then consulting as well all around the world, it was interesting how little they were on the same page, very much on the same page as to here's who we are, here's what we're selling, here's what our go-to-market strategy is. But in terms of how we engage and those who are on the front line, and to be clear, I don't talk about customer service. I think we've been talking about it for 50 years. I think businesses know how to be nice to people. Now, there's certainly nuances when it comes to call centers and things like that, certainly much more intricate. But I really talk about the experience. What do we as customers and clients and patients and constituents, and we all are for whoever it is that we're buying from or working with, how do we experience doing business differently? in many ways, COVID has accelerated what has long been predicted about how we're going to do business, right? Today, I wrote a blog the other day about some guy, 1972, he's caught up in some temporal vortex and he's transported 50 years into the future today, right? He wouldn't survive a week. He wouldn't know how to get food, to get money, to make a phone call, because everything is different. And in recent years, even more so. And so as buyers change in terms of our expectations, right, for access and immediacy and convenience and response, what I found with organizations is that there isn't a real consensus. I talked to leaders. I said, if I put everybody in a different room and ask you the same questions, how would you respond to this kind of a scenario? What is it that your customers prefer in terms of what they're doing after hours or how fast? And the answers were all over the map, because things had changed so much. And I realized what wasn't happening was the conversations internally so that we can get on the same page. And so what that turned into was a video series. And I worked with big organizations, and they would come up to me consistently afterwards. And they're very, very kind to me. You know this as well. They're very kind to us, very complimentary, but they would say, that was great. How do we keep the conversation going? I got to make sure that we don't lose momentum, right? Customer experience isn't a presentation. It's an ongoing strategy and effort. And so that's what sort of drove this video series, where I would work with organizations and send them a video once a week that was meant as a conversation starter, not motivation. It's saying, how do you respond to this? Or have you ever thought about this from the customer's perspective? And the intention of it was to spark these conversations. I were in like 3 different languages. And so I had this one organization, and they had, I don't want to say who they are specifically, but locations all across New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. And so I got on with them once over Zoom, once a quarter, and was sort of talking through some of the better conversations that they had. And one of the guys says, I feel bad, but I got to tell you that there was a couple of them that we didn't agree with you. And I started laughing, and I said, you're not supposed to agree with me. You're supposed to agree with each other. The purpose of these conversations is for you to explore these scenarios. What do we believe? How do we respond? Where are we willing to give and where are we not? And then come to a consensus as a company so that we are consistent in how we engage with our customers or our clients or our patients. And so for me, it's been honestly the most rewarding work that I did. After a year of that, we call that season 1 in Netflix terms. I realized I had so much content that it would work well as a book as well. And so I went back and sort of rewrote all those lessons. And each one, it's a story, it's a scenario. And then at the end of everything, I say, every chapter, here's why you do it. Understand, here's the rationale behind it, the business rationale for why we do what we do. Here's why you do it. Here's why we hate it from the customer's perspective, and then offer an alternative solution. Here's a better solution. Here's a better choice. And once again, whether they agree with me or not, it's meant to spark a conversation.
Well, and even what you were said there, I mean, all of us have to find relevancy in this. So, you know, like you were saying, spark the conversation, and let's be able to figure out how it relates, you know, to our customers, to our products and services, and to our organization, and to where we're headed. And that is the most important part. And so of this, when you start looking at all these conversations, I tallied up 41 different conversations. And I do like what you said as far as the format is concerned, like you explained. And so there are some suggestions, but like you said, it's like, it doesn't mean that you're going to cut and paste. That's not the objective.
No, because it's different as somebody in hotel and hospitality, as somebody in financial services, or somebody in manufacturing. And many of the companies that I work with are B2B. So even their customers and clients aren't necessarily consumers. If somebody's selling an electronic part that goes into a bigger electronic piece that goes into a vehicle, there's still an experience of how frustrating are you to do business with? How complicated is your process? How rigid are you in the policies that you have? And so that's what drove the conversations in the book.
So for me, we created an acronym many years ago, and we call it the PETA factor. Which is a pain in the you-know-what.
Absolutely.
And then when organizations didn't necessarily recognize that they were a PETA, we would call that corporate arrogance.
Yeah. Or just they've got the blinders on. I mean, they talk about so much that if you just put your head down, or I hear it was kind of I did a keynote for a conference, and right before me, the CEO did his sort of state of the company. and did the big rah-rah stuff at the beginning of the year. I think it was a January event. And at the very end, and he says, and remember, at the end of the day, it's about quality. And of course, everybody goes crazy. I thought to myself, oh God, I could not disagree more. I could not disagree more. It's not that quality is unimportant. It's incredibly important, but it's also assumed. At the end of the day, it's not about quality. At the beginning of the day, it's about quality. Quality is the entry fee.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's about competitive advantage. It's not what you do well. What do you do better than others who do it well? And I think today, it's how simple we are to work with as an organization.
Well, in the book, talking along those lines, and let's expand it a little bit. In the book, you talk about how oftentimes we hear it, but our people are our most valuable asset. And you're like, come on.
It's people who bear a striking resemblance to the people that work for your competitors. People always say, for us, our people make the difference. Or, for us, it's all about the people. Really? As opposed to the crustaceans that work for the bozo next door. The reality is, and I tell organizations, I said, it's not, you got to stop telling people you have better people and that you care more. Nobody believes it. Now, here's the point. You got to have great people. It's not unimportant, but it's not effective as a marketing strategy. It's more conspicuous in its absence, right? We recognize when somebody doesn't seem to care or is checked out or is rude or something else. But that's so pedestrian as a claim that our competitive advantage is our people. That's an internal message. That's just to stroke the employees that you have so they feel appreciated. It means nothing externally as a marketing message.
Well, I mean, to me, it's also puts you in an undue potential, burden scenario where things don't go right. And if you think they're going to be going right 100% of the time, you're naive. Right. And so people will hold those types of things against you. And so really, you shouldn't, like you said, you shouldn't even have put something like that out there in the first place, because now it's just another dart for somebody to throw at you.
It's exactly right. Exactly right. Well, and we also have to be on the same page, which doesn't mean that we're scripted, but we all have to come to agreement. Here's how we're going to address these situations. Here's who we want to be in the marketplace. And here are the behaviors and the policies and the technologies that will support that claim, that internal belief, that culture. But that's the whole point of the conversations of the morning huddle, is to make sure that we're talking about tough things before they happen. And then we're scrambling to try and recover. Then we get negative reviews online, and those never go away. And so it's important we move upstream a little bit and have these conversations. And
talking of those conversations, like I mentioned, I tallied up 41. And so for me, as I'm going through this list, there's so many that I would just love to dig deeper into. But on a show, it's expected that we get into the depth, and then also, like you were mentioning, that practical application piece. I always say, the worst question I think any interviewer could ask is, so why did you write the book? I'm like, any idiot can ask that, right? So I don't want to be that guy. Yeah, I don't want to be that guy. Okay, so for me, I want us to dig a little deeper on 3 of these 41.
Sure.
One is the P word, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other one is scheduling innovation, and the other one is your intelligence shouldn't be artificial. So to start, what is the P word?
The P word, of course, is pivot. And we use that term so much. And we went through something very difficult. And I know these podcasts are pretty evergreen, but when we went through COVID, it was unprecedented. There had really nobody alive, unless people were alive during the Spanish flu at the turn of the last century, who had been through this. And so what was interesting was I was bombarded within the first 6 weeks. I was bombarded probably 20 to 30 a day, and I counted them, of people offering free webinars on how to survive COVID-19, right? Free, webinars, seminars on how to survive. And last I checked, there was not a person alive who had successfully transcended and successfully overcome a pandemic. Yet everybody's an expert. Pivoting doesn't mean to go into something that you're not an expert and claim expert because you're desperate for business. And so in almost every industry, I saw speakers, I saw financial planners. Here's how to overcome, here's how to survive COVID-19. And nobody was an expert on that. We were all figuring it out. And we all thought it was going to go on for a couple of months, right? And it went on for over 2 years. But what was really interesting was everybody talking about and congratulating themselves and patting themselves on the back by shifting to Zoom and made this significant pivot. That's not a pivot. That's just adopting technologies that were already available. Zoom was around before before COVID. I mean, probably before COVID, I did 1 out of every 5 calls on Zoom. Today, it's 19 out of 20. I mean, look at you and I right now. We're in different parts of the country. We talk to different people in different parts of the world. For our parents' generation, this is magic. We are face-to-face, real time. This is freaking magic. For you and I, it's Friday, right? A pivot is really recognizing what's different in the world, how our customers and our clients' lives have changed, how their business models have changed. What did they go through? Who do they report to now that might be different? What are their financial constraints? And modifying what we deliver, how we sell it, what we produce or manufacturing in a way that's preferable to a whole new generation. That's customer centricity, of course, right? Product centric is saying we're really, really good at this. We work to be really good at this, and we sell this to as many people as possible. And that creates market share. And that's how business has been done for 1,000 years. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm an unapologetic, compassionate capitalist, right? But we're seeing the big shift to customer centricity. And of course, that is saying we're good at what we do. Everybody's good, but we're better than our competitors at understanding the complex changing lives and world and needs and expectations of our customers. Pivoting wasn't doing what we already did on a webcam. That's minor. The companies that made significant pivots, some were short-term. I knew a company that did plastic dinnerware for fast food places, and they pivoted to making clear lucite barriers for banks and retail locations, right? But the companies that really pivoted were the ones that had new alternative ways of delivering, touch-free options. A pivot is not taking away your menus at your restaurant and forcing people to use a QR code, right? That's just easier for you. I went to Qdoba just recently. I mean, we're sort of post-pandemic right now. And I said, can I get some Cholula sauce? And she says, I'm so sorry. The young 16-year-old behind the counter said, I'm sorry, we don't offer that up anymore. And I said, why? And she says, well, because of COVID. I said, because of all those Cholula related COVID exposures? Got to stop using that as an excuse. So a lot of what I do, it's a bit of a rant, but I try and use humor to challenge organizations to dig a little bit deeper. We did what we kind of had to do during that time, but now in a post-COVID world, we've got to recognize that pandemics can spring up all the time. Are we ready for it? We were caught flat-footed before, but how have we really shifted? If you have a business model that was created 20, 30, 40 years ago, my God, think how much the world has changed in the last 5 years. If you have essentially the same business model, if people engage with you and research you and buy from you and communicate with you the same way that they did 10 years ago, you are already behind. The real pivot is recognizing this whole omni-channel, right? I don't expect I can get my hair cut at 4 o'clock in the morning, but I do expect I can make an appointment to do so, right? And so I think the important pivots right now are coming from other industries, which is really interesting. And this is a whole new phenomenon. We always had to be one of the best in our industry. We had to compete against the best to compete for the best customers and clients. We're now being compared against industries that have nothing to do with what we do, right? Amazon or Uber Eats or whatever else, because it's changing us. And so for me, I think there's an opportunity for real pivots. And that's just recognizing as we future-proof our businesses, what are our customers and clients going to expect in the next couple of years? What's driving all of that? And what do we need to start doing now to be ready for that? So we're not scrambling to catch up.
Well, as you're saying that, it kind of leads into the next one. Because volume, is something that is always, focused on. And so therefore, I have to automate. I have to, quite frankly, not spend the time to learn about all those customer things,
right? Because
I've got objectives. I've got to hurry up and get this stuff done. And so the next thing, that we talk about, actually that I want to talk about, I've jumped a little bit, but is to say how your intelligence shouldn't be artificial. Because, look, as you were talking and talking about having more meaning and things like that, that means I have to engage and be more attentive and more in tune to the customer. And if I just think about, well, I can automate, I can do all of these other things, there's a risk associated with that.
Yeah. Well, right now, the bean counters and I say the term affectionately, are kind of driving a lot of the conversations. Yeah, we can cut people and go to chatbots, right? And bot, of course, stands for robot. So instead of the live person on the chat feature, they're going to robots. We're getting automated emails and billing. And my contention is you should only automate pedestrian tasks like billing, but never communication. Yeah, you can be really efficient, but you're not really very effective. You can send out a marketing message and be really proud of yourself that you sent out to 200,000 people at once through an online service. But most, if not all of them, are going to be, seen as spam, whether by the system or by the person individually, and not responded to. But we're seeing a lot of automation. I get it. As long as there's an off ramp. I hate chatbots. I'm the person who's going, real person, real person, real person. I think you said no, real person, right? I went to a conference. There was millennials on this panel. They're saying nobody wants to talk on the phone. Nobody wants. And I look at them and go, no, Sparky, you don't want to talk on the phone. But most of us are not serving one age group, right? We've got to be able to serve everybody. But I understand automation. I understand self-checkout. But the challenge is when we as companies, and this is what I mean about your intelligence shouldn't be artificial, is that when we start mimicking some of the worst behavior of automation, overly scripted, not really having engaging in conversation because we're so intent on reading that particular script. And I understand why it's happening. And you help companies get better at this yourself, Jim. I know this. So there's so many things that are out of our control. We can't control pandemics or the economy or technology or competitors, right? So we try to control what we can. So we create this customer journey. Here's how they're going to, when they first have an idea, they're going to look us up. Here's how they're going to research and reach out and communicate with us and select and buy and customize and pay and follow up. And the whole path, that journey works, right? Because we've created it. And if it doesn't, then we tweak it. Because if we can have a greater level of predictability of our customers' behavior, then we can have predictability of revenue and sales and cash flow. And we can plan for that. We can hire for that. The problem, of course, is your customers have never read your employee manual. They don't know how they're supposed to do it. They just know how they want to do it, and how they want to do it is changing. So I was talking to somebody and they said, how could this possibly be getting worse if we've been talking about it for 50 years? And I said, it's getting worse for that reason, is that we're becoming more rigid because we're trying to create and funnel people to the path. But at the same time, there's this dynamic that people want to do it their own way. They want to bypass the garbage. They want to see as their way to get this delivered. Can I get it same day? Can I get a response back? And that makes us as business owners crazy, because they're trying to, what was that line in The Incredibles? It's like they've permeated the bureaucracy, right? People want to try and do it their own way. And so we end up as businesses sounding artificial and overly scripted. We're not having a conversation. I'll give you a quick example. We're new empty nesters, my wife and I, and we just moved to a new place, and it's awesome. We can walk to restaurants. It's great. But I was trying to get my office set up and all the Wi-Fi and everything. And I had kind of an unusual situation. So I call my provider and I start explaining the situation. And he interrupts me and says, sir, we have a policy and we do not guarantee speeds, blah, blah. And I said, no, but that's not my issue. I understand that. So let me tell you something. And he interrupts me again and starts going into this pre-scripted whatever else. And I said, no, but hang on. And he does it again. And I'm getting really frustrated. And then I realize it was a recording. And I'm just embarrassed because I'm like having this argument with the recording. So I'm like, kill me here. I'm like, real person. And to my surprise, the voice says, sir, I am a real person. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. You kept interrupting me. I just assumed it was a recording. I apologize. Anyway, so here's my issue. And he does it again. And he says, sir, if you would let me talk. And I said, no, sir, you let me talk. I called you. And he says, fine. And I said, let me talk to a supervisor. And he says, supervisors can tell you the same thing I am. I said, how do you know what they're going to say? You don't even know what the problem is yet. I said, I promised you the script you want to read right now is not nearly as important as the conversation your customer wants to have. Switches me to supervisor, 20 seconds, we get it solved. But that's what I mean about that your intelligence shouldn't be artificial. My God, have a conversation. Now, I understand It's easier said than done. It's easier said than done with labor issues, but organizations, it's really scary for them to empower their front line. But when you're so worried about them making a bad decision and doing something we don't want to do and not getting off script, that you're also precluding them from doing something extraordinary or something very accommodating. It doesn't mean the answer is always yes, but we have to start saying yes more often. But here's my favorite line. I teach this to audiences when I travel around as well. And I said, listen, sometimes the answer is no, right? And not everybody's happy. If you have a vegan restaurant, somebody wants a buffalo burger. Sorry, dude, it's a hard no, right? But the magic phrase that I love is, even when we can't, even when we have to say no, the magic phrase is this: let me tell you what I can do, right? And anything that follows that's helpful de-escalates the situation, at least makes them feel like they're not talking to a brick wall. Yeah, we're not able to do that, but let me tell you what I can do, right? Or we're way behind because we have supply chain issues, but let me tell you what I can do. We can make sure that we reach out to you at least twice a week, right? I'll give you a status update. We're going to put you on the list. We're going to send you updates, right? Or even if it's referring to somebody else. But that whole chapter in the book about don't let your intelligence be artificial is about when we start mimicking the worst, the tone deaf kinds of responses that we get from artificial intelligence and chatbots and others as well. We need to take a step back, recognize the humanity of the person behind that potential conflict, that request. The reason they're requesting something is a very, very simple reason, because they want it or they need it. The more we understand why, that's customer centricity. But what's really easy is just to be lazy and just treat everybody the same. Right.
Well, as you're talking, it does require a whole lot of effort and focus in on a lot of those systems that, are doing that servicing. So it's like, the ongoing analysis of what happens within those interactions is often lacking. I set it up, it's running, it's not failing, and it doesn't matter what's happening on the back end. Right. Yeah. So
and it's frustrating for us.
It's very frustrating. And even to me, I spent 17 years working for a customer experience research scientist, not a rocket one. And so, matter of fact, I have to tell you this, since your dad was a real rocket scientist, is a colleague of hers who was also a consumer research scientist, had a conversation with one of her faculty peers and said, you're a rocket scientist. And he goes, yes, I am. And she says, well, let me ask you a couple of questions. She said, when that rocket actually is launched, can you predict within, essentially very, very little error that rocket is going to fly so far and then land and hit a particular target because of the gravitational pull, thrust, and all that stuff? Yeah. And he goes, absolutely. And she looked at him and said, try doing that with people.
Right. Which you can't.
You can't.
Yeah. It was interesting. My dad I talked to him, and he's passed on, but he talked about that dichotomy sometime when he had an experiment that went to Jupiter, and they literally did that whole slingshot thing. So it took off from Earth, went around the sun, picked up speed, back around Earth, around the sun one more time, and then shot out towards Jupiter. And what was crazy was it took years to get there, and they knew within 30 seconds of when it was going to hit the atmosphere, that far in advance. But the biggest challenge was leading his team and mentoring the younger workers, because we're not predictable. But that's the challenge with organizations. They try to implement sort of the franchise system, that if we can standardize processes and systems, we can have a greater level of predictability of outcome. But it doesn't take into effect, right? I mean, for so long, we sort of used demographics, and then we added psychographics, right? But every 23 to 25-year-old Asian woman doesn't like the same kind of pants, because there's so many other issues about their family situation and their dynamics and where they live and what's happened in their industries or in their lives in the last, we talk about that, right? The day in the life of our customer. And that needs to be taken into account. We don't have to know that what everybody's story is. We just have to know that they have one. Well, right? And hopes, and dreams, and fears, and yeah.
Well, it also tells me too. I mean, when you even started explaining that customer interaction that you had, it can't be an artificial voice-guided system that is also helping your people through that particular conversation. You have to go through the process of skill acquisition and development. And you can't cheat it through artificial means.
Well, Mr. Rumbach, I understand how frustrated you must be. My God, please don't placate. Just help me solve it.
Fix it.
That was my scripted response. You like that?
That was really good. Okay, so then all this ultimately leads into, for me, and this is where I often find a significant breakdown, is when we are not, collaborating, using, creative thinking, and then therefore subsequently innovating something that is going to be different. We don't take the time for it. Nobody knows how to actually approach it. And here's the thing: when you start talking about even creative thinking, our educational system strips it out of us, because essentially what we're doing is we're learning to take the test. Well, if I have to learn to take the test, why do I need to actually be creative in my thinking? Right. So
it's just memorization at that point. Right.
Yeah. It's definitely rote. And so we have an issue. So we have all these people who are out in the workforce that don't know, they've forgotten how to be that 5-year-old with the crayon and the clear board. Right. They don't know how to do that anymore. So we have to bring that back into our world very intentionally. So how can we, I think it's more than just scheduling innovation, but how can we actually improve, our ability to be that differentiated organization that you were talking about earlier?
I talked about in the book about scheduling it, because I think there's some great exercises that we're real busy. I mean, everybody's busy, right? Stephen Covey talked about that tornado of today, right? We would fill up every place on our calendar if we didn't schedule time to for ourselves. I've written books, and I have to put that on the calendar. If I got to deal with the publisher and my book is due on a certain time, I treat myself like a client. I put that on the calendar. And so what I encourage organizations to do is, and it goes back to the old skunk works, if you're familiar with all of that, back in I think it was the 1950s and 60s, where they put, I can't remember it was McDonnell Douglas or somebody, but they put this big crack group of scientists together, put them in a hangar by themselves, and nobody knew what they were doing, and they were innovating this great new jet. I think we've seen this with Google and others as well. Some organizations will say everybody gets 1 day a month to just innovate and create whatever they want. But it's putting that on the calendar. It's putting a team together and saying, let's take off the constraints. Let's take off the blinders. It's the same thing about shortening that process, right? If you have a 15-step process, is there a way to shorten that? Take your best people, put them in a room, close the door, order Chinese food, and say, don't leave until you've cut that process in half. Or at least allowing people to skip the garbage that doesn't pertain to them. Nobody wants to stand in the back of the line of a buffet if you just need to refill your drink, right? We're forced to listen to everybody's. Please listen carefully as our menu options have changed, knowing full well that none of those options are going to pertain to you, and you got to listen to the whole thing. But there's another exercise that I really like, which is the whole idea of competing against ourselves. Like, what if you, and this for all your listeners and your viewers as well, what if you were to leave your company today, no matter what your role might be, that you were going to exit on very good terms. You don't have a non-compete, but you're going to start a competing business to the one that you're currently in. But you're going to start that company in 2022. Maybe your company's been around for 50 years, maybe 100, maybe for just 5. But you're not bound by any legacy systems or policies or equipment or leases or technology or even people. You literally can start from scratch. The question is, what would you do differently? If you had to beat your current company and you created a new company, where are your vulnerabilities? Because when we do that on a regular basis, my God, I mean, if we can discover or ascertain what our deficiencies might be, don't you think competitors can do that? Or if some new disruptor comes to the marketplace and says, I'm not just going to beat you, I'm going to turn this on its head. I'm going to do something completely different, right? That's disruption, right? I mean, wouldn't you hate to be an orthodontist today, graduating from medical school with $250,000 worth of medical school debt, turn on the TV and see a commercial for Smile Direct Club, right? I mean, Invisalign was bad enough because dentists could do, orthodontics. Well, now you don't even have to go to a dentist. They just literally send you that goopy mold to your house. They're petrified. Orthodontists are petrified because somebody came in and disrupted their industry. But the reality is when it happens to you, because we're not, I wouldn't even say we're complacent. We're just working hard. Everybody's working hard. And then somebody else does something really different and creative, and we're scrambling to catch up. That's disruption. But when we pause and regularly schedule, let's put pencil to paper. Let's talk about where our deficiencies. How would you beat us today? If we, right? We just call that innovation. It's the same thing. It just depends on who's driving it. When it happens to us, we call it disruption. When we drive it, we call it innovation. So I like the idea of saying, let's remember that we have to question our assumptions on a regular basis. Whether it's, and if you're unfamiliar, look up Skunkworks. It's a pretty amazing strategy. A lot of the tech companies have employed, which is let's take off the constraints. Let's let our people be wildly creative. If money wasn't an object, if technology wasn't an object, how would you solve this differently? Right? I mean, how for our roads are packed, traffic is terrible. How many times can we widen them? How much can we elevate? I got an idea. What if we just shared the cars we already have? What if somebody's going somewhere where they could pick up somebody and take them on the way and bill for that? We create a central, right? That's Uber and Lyft. What if everybody's house was a hotel? Right. Well, hotels are trying to think, how do we do this brand extension? Do we do a little more extended stay? What kind of amenities? There's other people saying, what if you didn't have to go to a hotel at all? What if you could rent out your house on VRBO? You could rent out a room when your kid goes off to college. That's disruption. And you know who wins? We do as consumers. So when I talk about putting the innovation on the calendar, it's got to be a strategic priority. I'm a big believer that the answers are in the room. I work with organizations. I'll do half day, full day strategic sessions. We do some great interactive exercises, but it's asking these questions. If you were going to leave, how would you do it differently? And what's really interesting is some of the answers are not just here's something I would tweak. Someone say, I wouldn't do this part of my business at all. I would outsource this. I would actually become an aggregator and I would work with people in different industry overseas. Or some people say, I would, if I didn't have all the legacy customers that we needed because of the cash flow, I wouldn't do that part at all. Or I would do this thing remote, or I would buy this new piece of equipment. Whenever I work with second in command, C-level executives, they always I would focus much more on training. I would train people at the outset instead of trying to go back and fix problems. It's an exciting process, and it is a way to future-proof your business. And because we'll identify things and say, well, let's not wait for somebody else to do it. Let's us do it. Right.
Well, I mean, part of what you're talking about as I'm sitting here listening to you is and we start getting into some of the science of this is, first of all, we have to deal with confirmation bias issues. We have to deal with status quo bias issues. We have to learn how to actually apply divergent thinking capabilities. And so, I mean, all of those things are needed. I mean, do you actually get into that aspect of it as far as, okay, this is why you're being constrained? And then so there, okay.
I love it going back to in the mid 60s, a guy named Pete Pyre worked at Texas Instruments, and he came up with the whole concept of zero-based budgeting. And there were others who embraced that as well. And the whole idea is sort of this, and it sort of connects to confirmation bias in a way of saying, we make an assumption that next year's budget, next year's strategy is based on what we did this year. We do a little bit more of this, we do a little less of that. And if a company has, say, $1 million marketing budget, we would always say for the next year, do we have to cut? Do we add a few things? Let's do a little more digital. Zero-based budgeting says something different. Let's take everything off the table and let's build a marketing department and budget and priorities based on what we know today. Right? Let's just put things on the table and then look at that. What is that going to cost? Can we do it instead of just basing it on what we've done before? That was the promise of the internet, right? Access to all of this information would really broaden our horizons. But confirmation bias has people gravitating towards things that just reinforce their own worldview, right? Their own predisposition to think X or Y. And that's why it's important. And this is maybe self-serving, but it's not. It's to bring in people like Jim, bring in people like myself and others to give that outside perspective. To be able to, part of my job is I've worked with so many thousands of organizations. I've spoken to over 500 CEO roundtable groups and 7,000 conversations with CEOs. And I get to be in the room for that. I get to be in the room that hearing strategies and approaches and things I would never have thought about. I feel like I get an MBA every 18 months. And my job is to bring that outside perspective to organizations who have their head down and they're working hard and doing great work, saying, recognize what's happening around you. Recognize why your customers and your clients expectations and needs and desires and preferences are changing. And so that putting that on the calendar is saying literally and figuratively, make time for this. This is not an afterthought. This is survival. What could we do? Go ahead.
As you said that, I'm starting to think about, they have to have some vulnerability to have somebody to come from the outside and to tell them that their baby's ugly.
Yeah. Well, here's the other part is, Jim, and we joke about this as speakers, is that our job is to help people recognize the pain, whether they knew they had it or not. Point out that vulnerability that maybe they didn't even recognize, right? And then, of course, that source of pain, rip open the wound, pour some salt on it, and offer ourselves as the solution. A little cynical view, but the reality is companies don't necessarily recognize that vulnerability until they're scrambling to catch up, or even worse, they're a little arrogant in they literally think they've created the cure for cancer that tastes like chocolate, and that people have but to know that they exist. And the reality is there's some very creative people out there solving problems and looking at problems differently. I tell audiences all the time, I say, while we're in this room learning and sharing and growing our businesses together, there are people in rooms all around the world who are trying to think about how to do what you do differently and better and faster and smarter and more conveniently. And the reality is we better do that ourselves, or we will be vulnerable. That's what putting that kind of innovation on the calendar means.
Yeah, so I want to sit there and say, so go disrupt yourself.
for sure. And I'm a big believer. I think the answers are in the room.
It is.
I work with organizations, sometimes audiences in the hundreds or thousands, and we crowdsource. Let's ask some questions, right? What do you think your customers wish you would offer that you don't currently offer? What do you think they would love you to provide or sell or offer that you don't currently offer? What would they love? Don't tell me what they love about you. Tell me what they would love if you would do it. And I've done that, crowdsourced 1,200 ideas in 7 minutes.
Well, and part of that too is talking about the divergent convergent thinking thing is
Sure.
that it's like, okay, nobody squashes anybody's idea. Not allowed.
Right. That's the yes and. That's the what do they call it? Improv kind of philosophy.
Most
right?
definitely.
Everything. And that's the thing. That's one of the keys to facilitation. Because I tell people, I said, you can do this. Just grab a flip chart, ask the question. I said, but here's the key. You have to write everything down or you shut down the room. You can't filter from the front of the room. Or when somebody has an idea and you're like, oh, good, Jim, that's a great idea. Jenny, oh, love that. Phil, no, anyone else, right? And then nobody raises their hand because they're like, I don't, you don't want to be called out.
I don't want to be Phil. I don't want to be Phil.
It's an art.
Definitely it is. And so, okay. So I'm looking at, you have, several books, doing all this speaking, traveling around the world, meeting, with these executives, helping them to go disrupt themselves. I start thinking about, okay, David Avrin, what is one of your goals or marks that you have a target on that you're going after?
It's a great question. I think mine are a little bit different because we're empty nesters and because I'm going to be 59 in about a week. And I know what you're thinking. He cannot be 59. I know. What? For me, it's more legacy stuff now. I want to keep doing it. People are saying, what do you want to do? Or the funny thing is when people say, what are you going to do I don't know what I'm going to do when the kids leave. I'm like, well, we know what we're going to do, whatever the heck we want. But it's, we're kind of in a different place in that I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. I've spoken in 25 countries around the world. My mom passed away at 69 and never owned a passport. So I'm really, really lucky. I just want to do more of it with my wife. Because I used to race home because I had kids in sports, I had kids, and I would block those dates off the calendar because I didn't want to be that dad. I love that line that says our kids take attendance at all of their events and we're either there or we're not, right? And I wanted to be that dad that was there. So now some of those constraints are off. And so when I go and travel to great countries and amazing places, now there's an opportunity to stay a couple extra days. right? And go on safari or go tour some castles, which is what we're going to do next week in Ireland. And so that's sort of my plan, is to do, I'm really fortunate to do what I've wanted to do. I just want to do more of it with my wonderful wife. And then the rest of it is about really being a little more introspective about legacy. And as we said in the introduction, about leaving the campsite a little better than we found it.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, David, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust, yet concise and brief.
There you go.
Brief responses.
I don't do brief, but let's try it.
That's right. To go. So, David Avrin, are you ready to help us all get over the...
Jim Rembach, I am ready. Let's do it.
You're ready. Okay. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Holding me back is, oh boy, what a great question. Is recognizing, because leadership is not my subject, is not falling back into my old habits of feeling like I had to do everything myself. I think the thing I'm working really hard to try and be better at is the delegation, and recognizing that perfect is the enemy of great, and so there's my answer.
So, what is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Best leadership advice. Great advice from my father. He said, "Remember, nobody will share your sense of urgency. Just because it's really important to me and number one on my list at that particular moment doesn't mean it's somebody else's priority at that particular moment." And yeah.
And what would be one tool that you that you believe helps you in work or life?
You know what? Here's funny. It's an app. The greatest tool is TripIt on my phone, because I travel so extensively. I've been in 6 cities in the last 9 days. And to be able to open my phone and say, here's the hotel, here's the car, here's the flight, here's when the next flight, here's the notifications. So I don't have to open up and look at paper and worry that I lose it. It is the best all-in-one. It is one of my most important assistants, is because travel is such an integral part of my life and what I do. And because in 24 years, I've never missed a scheduled presentation. Knock on wood and knock on everything else, TripIt is killer for me.
Well, and that's a very nice tool. Okay, so also, what would be one book we would recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to the Morning Huddle on your show notes page as well.
Book. I read a recent book that I thought was really great by Bruce Turkell. It's called "Is That All There Is?" And for somebody who is entering the third act of their life, it's a lot of vignettes, a lot of stories of people who redefine themselves. We sort of assume that everybody in their third act does a little bit more of what they've always done, but they add travel and grandkids. And it's been really fascinating looking at people who made a complete pivot, we'll use the P word again, in their life. And so that was a recent book that I read that I thought was really great. The other one is Robbie Kilman Baxter wrote a book called The Forever Economy about membership models. Really brilliant.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find the links to that and other bonus information by going to fastleader.net and doing a search for David Avrin. That's Avrin. Okay, David, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you get the opportunity to go back to the age of 25 and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
Oh God, it would be humility. I don't know that I was particularly cocky, but I was probably very brash. Wasn't necessarily everybody's cup of tea. Of course, where I am today, where we all are, is a function of what we have done and achieved and accomplished and won and lost and loved and learned. So I would assume where I am today is in large part, but I would be a little more humble and a little less loud and a little less opinionated, or maybe a little stronger in keeping some of my opinions to myself.
David, I've had fun chatting with you today. How does the Fast Leader Legion get in touch with you?
Anybody wants to get in touch with me, just look me up online. It's davidavrin.com. On social media, it's David Avrin everywhere. You just Google it. And on Instagram, it's The Real David Avrin, because that's all other catfish for another day.
David Avrin, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.